Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. We have a very special edition. There's a team we've been talking about a lot on this show. And I think the fans of this team feel that we've been fairly unfair to them. And I'm willing to admit that, but I'm not sure how unfair it is when a lot of it has been brought on itself by the team itself or the people affiliated with the team. So Anwar Richardson from Orange Bloods is joining us. I used to work with Anwar at the Tampa Tribune. We used to cover high schools together, but he covers Texas for Orange Bloods, and we're going to talk Longhorns. But Anwar, before we start, I'm going to read this list that you sent me last week, because you and I were texting. We were texting after Moro Ojomo said what he said, and then Steve Sarkisian came back and said, well, we can't have that. And what Moro, who is a senior defensive tackle, what he said was, well, you're going to hear it. But this is the list Anwar sent me of everything that's happened in the last year or so at Texas. Sarkeesian roasts Moro for publicly calling out players who don't want to win, which he did. Pole assassin / Monkeygate.
That happened. Huge argument with Joshua Moore that leads to the receiver heading into the portal midseason. Bo Davis, the D-line coach, screaming at players after a loss and being broadcast on social media. Also, what Bo Davis said and what Moro said, not that different. But correct. Again, we'll get to that. Yeah. On the field, Kansas, 6 straight losses, 5-7. And, of course, the big positive, getting Quinn Ewers in a top-ranked class so far that features a guy suspended a few months after landing on campus. That's a lot. It's, Andy, it's so interesting because someone gave me this analogy once, and I thought it was actually pretty accurate. They said, the Texas Longhorns are almost the equivalent of the Dallas Cowboys. And I was like, let me think about that for a second. And in many ways, it's almost accurate and it's fair. And maybe it's not something Texas fans love, but it's the team that accomplished something years ago, that has the brand, that has the name, the program that everyone looks to in the offseason, the program that everyone gets excited about, in the offseason. I just saw the ESPN, rankings. What was it?
We talked about the FPI, baby.
Yeah, and it's like they put Texas in there after a 5-7 season. They've already got like preseason, like college playoff odds, and it's just like, here you go. The burnt orange Kool-Aid is getting started in the offseason. And then what unfortunately has happened is that they just haven't lived up to the expectations really since 2009. And so we get a lot of drama, unfortunately. And I think everyone's like optimistic that Sarkeesian can at some point put an end to this.
Where the kid was in the monkey space, allegedly.
The kid allegedly was not supposed to be back there.
We can't blame the monkey or the dancer if the kid was in the monkey space.
Yes. So the kid, technically, they're not wrong, right? They're definitely not wrong. It just led to headlines where you're just like, again, here we go, again.
And that's what it is. And the thing I got so frustrated about, and the Texas fans got mad at me for voicing this, but it doesn't sound like it's that different than what a lot of other Texas fans were saying. Steve Sarkisian getting mad at Moro Ojomo for saying what he said, rather than being like, you know what, he's right, and it's my job to fix that.
Yeah, that's the thing. So with everything that was said, and I know you'll play the clip soon, with everything that was said and then the response by Steve Sarkisian, the one thing he did not say was that Moro was incorrect. He didn't say Moro was wrong. He just said, I don't want him saying it, or don't need him saying it. And, I think when you hear it in context, and then, of course, having a chance to have spoken to Moro over the past couple of years, the bottom line, Andy, is that he just wants to win. And he's frustrated with the losing that has occurred, here at Texas. There's a lot of pressure, more so here than any other program. Someone asked me the other week, they asked me if Steve Sarkisian is a good coach. I say he's a good coach, but the job requires you to be great. At University of Texas, they don't want you to be good. They want you to be great. Tom Herman was good. That got him fired after a 7-3 season. They want you to be great. That becomes the bar. And so what Moro was talking about is not for them being good, but how did they go on to being great? And he was kind of saying to him, you know, man, I see guys, I'm trying, and guys are so interested in partying and they want to go out and chase women and make money, but none of them are really trying to, you know, put in that extra work. There's a culture. He was really speaking to the culture that has existed, that Charlie Strong tried to break, that we see that Tom Herman tried to break, that we saw Steve Sarkisian try to break. And he was speaking about something that's a little bit deeper in there. He shined a light on something, and maybe at some point he ends up being the martyr, Andy, that even though no one liked, you know, people didn't like what he said, maybe it just needed to be said, and maybe he just needed to be the bad guy for saying it. But nothing he said was incorrect. And by the way, it's fair, Andy, after a 5-7 season to say, you know what, we have some problems here that need to get sorted out.
Well, and so let's hear what Moro said. This is the one that everybody jumped on. This was the kind of money quote. And you guys talked to him for 25 minutes, and you sent me the whole clip, and I've listened to it all in context. And yeah, you can sense from this guy how bad he wants to win. Now, there may be a question of, is he the right messenger for this? Is he a good enough player in terms of production and everything else to be saying this? Would this have to be Bijan Robinson or Xavier Worthy or somebody like that for it to really land? But you listen to the guy, and again, like you said, there are no lies detected. So here's Moro.
No, I mean it's hard. They're 18 to 22-year-olds that want to chase women, want to chase money, want to chase alcohol, and they don't see the future. They're very distracted by like what is in front of them. You know, it's such a hard thing, especially guys that haven't been in a winning culture. That's why it's very easy for a lot of these powerhouses to keep going, because it's established. So the new guys just come in and they're like, oh shit, this is how we have to do it. Oh shit, this is what we do, right? It's so much more difficult. You know, they always talk about coming here and changing stuff. Like, coming here and changing stuff, it's like, it's ingrained. You know what I mean? Like, you're uprooting, 10 years of shit that's just been, like, let go and go by. Like, they're more worried about being on 6th Street than, like, balling and making $50 million. It's crazy as hell. I don't know why.
He's not wrong.
Correct.
And what's interesting about that is, you know, he's talking about the programs that have it rolling and how that sort of perpetuates itself. And I think back to like when Alabama won the national title in 2015, I remember Jonathan Allen talking about how much Dalvin Tomlinson and Bijan Robinson policed the locker room. And somebody said something to the tune of, well, what if somebody just gets out of line? And Jonathan Allen goes, would you look at Bijan?
Yeah.
You think that's ever going to happen? And it's like that. I mean, Clemson had Grady. It goes back to Grady Jarrett doing that for them, and then he taught, you know, Christian Wilkins or you know, what the next Malachi Goodman. He taught the next group, and they taught the next group.
Yeah, the problem is what each group now at Texas is what they're teaching them is just somewhat mediocrity, you know, or be a slightly above average. And, you know, there was a problem like, and you remember this very distinctly, Andy. I know you remember this when Tom Herman had gotten there, right?
Yep.
He came in with that kind of like fiery attitude, sit the F up in meetings. You know, he made national headlines for, you know, the burnt toast and the soggy
P-chart
champion stuff. I think he got that from Urban, if I'm correct. But
that is all. Yeah, that's all Urban stuff right there.
Yeah. So he went the P chart, the infamous P chart, right, that he used to have out there. And you
championship hydration every day for me.
Boy, because I didn't want to be a bad guy, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But you know what happened? People didn't like that. You know, the parents didn't like that. The players didn't like that. And he got a hard time, you know, for trying to institute those kind of changes. He was kind of going more of like a hard ass, let's just break this culture and get this thing going. And it kind of had it a little bit, but you know, it doesn't happen, right? You know, Steve Sarkisian, he's probably more of a player's coach. Right. Because of his NFL background, he's like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's, Tony Dungy was a player's coach, right? You can have success.
Tony Dungy's teams were so self-disciplined, though.
Correct. Absolutely. To the point where they're like, eventually, you remember in Tampa, they're like, we need to bring in a bad guy, bring in John Gruden in order to get him over the hump. And it helped initially. And then, of course, it, failed after that. And so the challenge that, and Moro's 100% correct. How do you teach these guys how to win when they don't know how to win? It explains why you can have the lead that they had against Oklahoma, and then all of a sudden it just all falls apart. It explains they can have leads going into the fourth quarters of 3 games this past season and then lose each game. It's because tomorrow's point, it's like there's a culture thing. The only thing, and look, and at the end of the day, Charlie Strong came in. He started hard, but then became a player's coach. Tom Herman was kind of an ass, and then he kind of softened up at the end to the point where he had a guy quit during a game, and the guy was back the next day. And then there's Sarkeesian. At the end of the day, what will change culture is winning. And they've just got to, the worst part, I think, about the Tom Herman era was that after that Sugar Bowl season, they couldn't capitalize on it. They couldn't keep it going to get that bowl rolling. They've got to find a way, and Sarkeesian's got to find a way. And it may be, one of the things that he's doing, Andy, is going into the transfer portal a little bit more heavier this year than he did last year. And he's bringing in guys, from an Alabama and, an Ohio State. He's bringing in guys who are used to winning and maybe having a little bit more, being around a winning culture. And so by maybe bringing in that, they just had in, hopefully I'm saying his name correctly, Jai Hall. Was just,
who was suspended at Alabama, by the way.
So. Well, maybe, Texas probably don't need any more choir boys, Andy.
No, you're probably right.
But at some point, Texas isn't trying to win some FCA awards. Okay, they're trying to win some football games.
Yeah. Well, it's more of the thing is you're not getting the Alabama culture if you get the guy who couldn't handle the Alabama culture. So
yes. You're 100% fair. But they've also brought in Jaleel Billingsley, who was a tight end there. They brought in Bijan Robinson the other year previous, to that. Same standouts. Also brought in Ryan Watts, the cornerback, as well.
Well, the thing is, Sark knows these guys because he was coaching. He helped recruit them. He was coaching when they were on the team, and I think I don't know if he had Hall at all, because I think he'd already moved on to Texas, but he was involved in his recruitment. Certainly was involved with Billingsley and coached him. I think that's part of it. I am curious to know what Sark took from Saban on that front, or what he took from Pete Carroll. And we've seen Sark as a head coach following his time with Pete Carroll, but at Washington, at USC, you kind of wonder how much the other stuff got in the way. Now you have a different situation with Sark, and he's worked with Nick Saban, he's worked with Pete Carroll. How much of those cultures can he work? And I think the culture has to be different at Texas. I almost think the one at USC that Carroll had is a better fit for Texas and the players there, where you are rock stars. You get to act like rock stars. We're going to treat you like rock stars. That almost works better, I think, for that personality type.
I think you're 100% nailed it, because it's the thing that we've seen, Andy, is that we've seen coaches come in and tell you this is our new culture, as opposed to taking the time to understand what the Texas culture is. And to your point, saying, oh, okay, these guys come from the state of Texas where they all are superstars. They've all been somewhat coddled for, many years. They play in the biggest stadiums. I mean, the stadiums that we saw, and you talk about our high school days and stuff, and Jefferson's and Land O'Lakes stadiums versus, what they play in over here. It's, go out to Katy. And so when you get these guys who are superstars, who are used to playing in front of, 20,000 people on a Friday night, they get here. And one of the things that Moro talked about is correct. They feel like they've arrived. Like they feel like I've done it. I'm here. I'm at UT. Here I am. But like you said, now how do you take that Hollywood thing? How do you take Austin in all the glory and as beautiful city as is, Lake Travis and all this other type of stuff, the spotlight, instead of saying we're going to try to be like Bama, instead of, to your point, instead of trying to be, we're going to be like Ohio State and try to replicate that, it's to say, oh, this is Texas. And I love what you're saying, Andy. You know what? We're going to be Hollywood, but we're going to be some bad mofos in the process.
Yep.
But we're not going to shy away from who we are.
Yeah, and that's what you got to do. And you and I have talked about this because we both grew up in Florida. We both understand the football culture in Florida, and part of it is me just being where I'm from. But I'm always like, the best in Florida would always whip the best in Texas, because the best in Florida are just hungrier. They don't get treated like superstars in Florida. They have to work for it, and they come up with a different
fields.
They might have practice field, they got fire ant piles all over them if they're lucky. So yeah, there's no turf. And then they have that now. Like my high school has turf now, which is just crazy to me. But a lot of these guys come, like some of the best players in Florida come from places where they don't put any money toward football, coaching, facilities, anything like that. So it's a totally different environment, totally different upbringing. And you've got to understand that. And so I am curious. And here's another clip from Moro, because this one I thought hit home too, where he talks about, and this actually feeds into something he didn't mention this, but I got to thinking about this, how poorly they have developed players for the NFL over the last 10 years. And I don't know if that's a recruiting thing or raw materials thing, or they're just not coaching them up that well. But when Oklahoma produces twice as many draft picks as you over a 10-year period, you're not doing it right. So here's him talking about this and what guys have done while they're at Texas over the last 10 years.
100%. It's sad. We had this accountability group thing, and I met with my group, and I try to explain to them and impart on them knowledge of, guys that I came in with that had talent that have done nothing with themselves. And it's just sad. And they have maybe a bare minimum degree, and they make no money off of football. And I really try to impart on them that, you can't waste this opportunity. It's going to be gone like this. You're going to be thinking about them days, you know what I'm saying? And I guess it's just so sad thinking about some of the people that have, some of them escaped. Caden Stearns, Justice Asai, but there are a lot more that should have been with them that didn't make it out with them.
I think by escaped, he's talking about
made it to the league,
made it to the NFL, and I think he's talking about drastic life circumstances necessarily, but that is another problem for Texas that affects Texas in recruiting. And everybody says, "Oh, the recruiting rankings are high," but you got to remember with recruiting rankings, they have to fit. Like you can get highly ranked players, but if they don't fit what you do, that probably causes more problems than if you just gotten lower ranked players that fit your scheme and what you're doing. Yeah. And that's not just I'm not talking about Sark's administration. I'm talking about going all the way back.
Yeah, I mean, Andy, the talent, isn't always the issue. It's just, you're correct when you say the development of the talent. One of the things that I say a lot while I'm here, and especially during the Gary Patterson era, I always said, well, how many 5-stars does it take to beat TCU? I mean, how many 5-stars does it take to beat Oklahoma State? Like, Texas always talks about accumulating talent and, wanting to compete against Bama and Clemson, Georgia for the elite guys. But if you used to start from, the smaller level, Andy, and just say, okay, before I even get to the NFL, just getting out of the Big 12, we've seen it happen twice over the past couple of years with Baylor, almost starting over from scratch and then finding ways to have success within the Big 12, whether it's Matt Rule, whether it's Dave Aranda.
And Baylor's producing NFL players.
Yes. Baylor had more guys at the combine than Texas did. Texas had 2 guys at the combine this year, and one was a kicker. And then the other's a DB. And I'm not
kicker,
quite
very
sure,
good.
And I'm not quite sure where either of one of those guys get drafted, if they get drafted, at all. It's risky. I mean, Texas may have a guy who's drafted day 3, 6th or 7th round, but we talk about from a recruiting perspective, that hurts. That's it's easier when you start thinking about where do I want to go. One of the some of the death blows to Tom Herman was when Quinn Ewers wanted to go somewhere else, and then eventually the Brockermeyers, when they decided like I'm not going to have anything to do with that, and I'm going to go to Bama.
These are twin offensive linemen from Texas. Dad played for Texas.
Correct, and they have everyone in their family essentially went to Texas, and they decided to go somewhere else. And some of that, is when a guy start thinking about which program could get me ready for the league. Sometimes Texas doesn't rank, and do the math on this, Andy. 2005, when we think about the game of the biggest game in Texas history, and now let's go to
Texas has NFL players all over the field in that game.
But now think about it from another perspective, Andy. It's 2000, so we're in 2022. If you go to that and minus that by 2005,
the recruits were just born.
We're talking about like babies, if not born at all. And so you have a generation of kids who don't know the University of Texas that we know. It's the same way you have a generation that doesn't understand, like Nebraska once was a powerhouse, right? And Tommy Frazier was so amazing, and Osborne, like all that type of stuff. That's our generation. Yeah. These kids just look at it like Nebraska, it is what it is. Texas, a lot of hype, but they've seen other programs be more successful in that time frame.
Yeah, it is, and that is so hard to overcome at this, because the word that Moro used was ingrained. And I think that's probably, by the way, that guy needs a podcast. I know Steve Sarkisian says he doesn't want to let him talk again, but this is the NIL era. And Moro had some thoughts on NIL as well. And he doesn't seem to be all that interested in it. But if somebody wants to throw him some NIL bucks to a podcast, I would listen to that, because that dude's pretty smart.
All day. Because, it's fun. We want our athletes to be honest. And then when they're honest, we're like, whoa, that was too honest.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that's why I never criticize anybody for saying how they feel. Like you say how you feel, and we'll deal with the fallout from that. But so there are guys on this Texas team that are special athletes, though. Like Bijan Robinson going into year 3, in terms of tools, maybe the best running back in the country. And in terms of when draft evaluators get a hold of him and look at his balance and his size and speed and strength and all that, they're going to love him. Can he be the centerpiece of an offense? Can he be what Najee Harris was to Alabama? They've got Xavier Worthy, who first play the Oklahoma game, you're like, oh, man, this is going to be amazing. Yeah. So, can they finally get over that hump where some of these guys who were special recruits become very special college football players?
That becomes a big question. And the thing is, Andy, some of the things I talked about, it's almost like there's so many reasons why it should happen that it would be crazy if it doesn't. When I talk about, they finishing with a top 5 recruiting class and Texas doing something that they hadn't done in years, which is stack on the offensive line and the defensive line. That has been a huge weakness for this program as far as recruiting is concerned for years, Andy. They've had guys who've gone to the league, but it wasn't because they recruited a high 5-star and he just kept it going. There's the guys who, Connor Williams that kind of, develops, and you're like, oh, okay, that happened, but it wasn't what you recruited him thinking that was going to happen. But, you look at, they've been able to bring in a guy like Quinn Ewers, right? They've got Jaleel Billingsley, the tight end in the transfer portal. They were able to get Isaiah Nayor from Wyoming, who I believe you guys had listed at The Athletic as one of the top transfer portal.
He was really good last year, and Tennessee thought they had him. He had committed there and then decided to go to Texas, where, I mean, shoot, if he's as good as he was and Worthy's playing on the same field, I think you're gonna have a hard time covering them.
Well, yeah, and so you still have that. Jordan Whittington, comes back, and if he's healthy, that's a heck of a trio there. As far as offensive weapons are concerned. They bring in Ryan Watts, the cornerback out of Ohio State, as an addition. They bring in Gary Patterson, as a specialist, a guy who that's a defensive guy. Hey,
Gary, how'd you beat us with all those 3 stars?
You can't beat them, join them, So you have you have Gary Patterson that's there. They bring in two new assistant coaches, Andy, Brendan Marion, who was
Mhm.
at Pitt, was coach for
Had the
Addison,
Biletnikoff winner. Yeah.
Biletnikoff winner. He's now at Texas. Tashard Choice joins us as a running backs coach, replacing Stan Drayton, who becomes the head coach at Temple. And then you still have the possibility of certain guys out there. Like we talked about Hall. O'Shawn Mathis is a guy from TCU, a defensive end. Maybe doesn't have the national name, but I know you're familiar with him.
Well, and his mom gets in your chats when you're doing your live show. That's the best. She just answers questions.
It was amazing. And then, in this, he's probably visited the campus. He just decided last week, after visiting Nebraska 2 weeks ago, and he's supposed to have an official visit this upcoming week. He just woke up on a Saturday and was like, I'm going to go to Texas and just hang out there and go to practice. So you see that trending in the right direction. And if with all those components on the table, you look at it and say, you don't want to I don't want to pour the Kool-Aid, but you say, man, they got to be better. I mean, they've got to at least be better. They can't. This is
like the video you sent me on Twitter of the Texas fan playing both sides, where he plays the person who's skeptical of Texas, and then the person who convinces him, talks him into Texas one more time. And it's true. I mean, it's hard to look at all the inherent advantages and look at all the players and the on paper talent and not expect big things. Now, I am curious about the quarterback situation because Quinn Ewers was committed to Texas under Tom Herman. He decommits, commits to Ohio State. He goes to Ohio State a year early because the state of Texas wouldn't let him make NIL deals as a high school athlete. But CJ Stroud is very much ensconced as Ohio State's starting quarterback. He will be Ohio State's starting quarterback this year and will probably be in the NFL next year. Quinn Ewers transfers to Texas. It's him against Hudson Card for the starting job. How do you think that's going to play out?
I mean, I think it's Quinn's job to lose at this point. I think there's a couple of things associated with it. One, Quinn is talented. Hudson is talented. I think there's a couple of challenges I think Hudson Card faces in this quarterback battle. The one thing is that we know Hudson Card is great on the practice field. We know that. And to that point, he won the job. He beat out Casey Thompson, who's now there at Nebraska.
Nebraska, yep.
But what happened is when they played against Arkansas, that game speed was overwhelming for Hudson to the point that he got benched, and they put in Casey the following week, and then Casey caught fire at that point. So if you are Steve Sarkisian, how do you believe anything you see in practice this offseason? How do you know for sure it won't burn you again? Because it burned you once. Two, if you're Steve Sarkisian, you've used your kind of get out of jail free card in year one. Yeah, I would say this, Andy. If this team finishes 7-5 or 8-4, it probably feels a lot different and more optimistic. If Quinn is the quarterback, now if Quinn's the quarterback and he's a redshirt freshman, you can say 8-4. Okay, he's growing, he's learning.
Especially it depends on how the four go.
Correct.
Like if they're competitive, and that I'm with you on that. And it's what's weird about the Sark thing is last year was not a year zero situation. Like they fired Tom Herman because he was not achieving to the level that satisfied them. Yeah. They weren't terrible.
And they took 7-3. I mean,
yeah, and they took a step back. And so that's the part that scares you now, because like Sark's record as a head coach didn't exactly light the world on fire before that. But you said, okay, that was a different situation. He got fired at USC for off the field reasons. That, according to everybody, has been cleared up. So that part, I worry about that, because you should be, if you are hired as the upgrade, which was the way this was sold, it should be an upgrade, and it hasn't looked like it.
Yeah, I mean, it's been an upgrade as far as recruiting is concerned. Like, right. That's it's a potential upgrade as far as bringing in those guys. But look, it's not an insult, and nor is it any disrespect to say Steve Sarkisian still has to prove himself as a head coach. It's
entirely true.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, I mean, he's never won more than 8 regular season games. He had 9 at one point, but he's never won more than 8. He was always around that 7-win kind of thing there. And look, yes, He worked under Saban. They had a lot of success under Saban, but at some point it's easy to be Scottie Pippen to Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
There are two now Saban former assistants that have won the national title. One happens to be about an hour and a half from Austin in College Station, and the other is in Athens. And those are going to be conference rivals for the Longhorns in the next few years, but they're not yet. And you just have to, but you have to look at what Kirby took from Nick Saban, and they are recruiting at an entirely different level than Texas is at Georgia. Texas A&M is, at least this past year, recruiting at a different level than Texas has been. So that part of it is going to be interesting as they transition. I've said this about Texas and Oklahoma when it comes to going to the SEC. I actually think getting that SEC patch on the jersey will improve their recruiting. Everybody else seems to think, oh, now they're going to get killed because now they have to recruit against LSU and Alabama and Oklahoma and Georgia. But I think there are players that stayed away from the Big 12, specifically on the defensive line, that will say, "Oh, you're in the SEC now? No, I'll sign now."
Well, because the ultimate goal for all these kids is that they want to go pro. I mean, right, wrong, or indifferent, Andy. Every time a kid signs their letter of intent or a scholarship, you always hear for the next 3, maybe 4 years,
right?
My talents is somewhere. Like
for the next 3 to 4 years,
every kid talks about the next 3, maybe 4. I mean, I don't know if something doesn't go right, but they all say it's like 3 or 4 because they all think they're going to go pro. And so the thought process is, look, we'll see, and we'll see it next week. Okay, next Sunday after the NFL draft is out, and we see the numbers of who got drafted from what conference. It's going to have the SEC with 50-something players, 60-something players.
And far and away on the line of scrimmage, the SEC is going to be winning.
Yes.
So.
And then way, way down there at the bottom, you're going to see the Big 12 competing with, some the other conferences, and some may not even be Power 5 conferences. And so, you that's how you want to do it. Now, the good part, I think, is that we saw a boost from offensive line / defensive line recruiting from Texas like I said, in this 2022 class.
Right.
Which I gotta give
and those guys are looking at, I may play in the SEC. We don't know all the vibe. I am curious about that, because everybody I've talked to, there's been no vibe coming out of Oklahoma or Texas that they're going to get in the SEC any earlier than 2025. Has there been any chatter on you guys' end that they might be able to figure out a way to make that happen with, leadership change in the Big 12, any of the new stuff?
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they're willing to cut that check at this moment. And, again, you can cut the check, but it doesn't seem like they're willing to do that. I think there's also, if I'm correct, Andy, I think there's an 18-month notice that must be given. And that has not been given yet. So, you start pushing that back.
Doing the math. Yeah.
You start doing the math. You're like, okay, if they did it today, you're still talking about 2024-ish or so. So more likely they seem to be willing to wait, to 2025, not, cut this conference, another check and be patient about it. I think there was optimism and hope, but from the Texas side that maybe they can get let out, something be done. But at this point, I think they're content to just, stay the course and see what happens.
Yeah. So this class of 2023 will be the one where guys are saying, okay, I'm definitely going to play in the SEC. Like, I'm going to play at least 1 year in the SEC. Mm-hmm. And I will be curious to see how big of a difference that makes when Texas is recruiting them, when Oklahoma is recruiting them, because I'm guessing there will be some players who might think of those two who might have had a different list otherwise.
Yeah, well, for instance, one of the big names that Texas is in on, and Sarkeesian's doing a great job recruiting, is Arch Manning, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But when you look at the Manning family, Andy, that's an SEC family.
Yeah,
right.
Ole Miss and Tennessee. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, that's an SEC family. So, was he really going to jump out of the SEC boat, the SEC familiarity, just to play in the Big 12? Like, I'm not quite sure. Arch has been like, man, I can't wait to go against Texas Tech one day. I can't wait to face Baylor and TCU. Like, this is the childhood dream, is what I grew up watching. Like, no, but having an opportunity to work with Sarkeesian, and to your point, Andy, then face SEC opponents, I think that helps. Now, the other thing that's huge, A&M has got it rolling from a recruiting standpoint, so there is some catch-up work that's going to need to occur.
Yeah, and that's going to be an interesting dynamic, just because the Texas A&M thing, and we had Billy Lucci on a couple weeks ago.
Billy.
And I know you all Orange Bloods and Texags,
Yeah, Billy and I are
peanut
friends.
butter and jelly. Listen, I know, I understand. I can break kayfabe. You guys can't, but this will be an interesting test of the dynamics. I actually think Texas and Texas A&M will find out when they are both in the SEC together that they have more in common than they realize. And they will find themselves on the same side of a lot of issues. But I do think the superiority that the Texas fans feel regarding A&M, you may feel that way about the school still, and the liberal arts versus ag school dynamics and all that. I don't think they're going to be able to feel that way about the football piece of it, because I liken it to, you've got the older brother who used to always beat up on little brother. The older brother went away to college. Meanwhile, little brother hit a growth spurt and hit the weight room. And you're like, oh, dang, you can probably take me now. So
yeah, and you're right, and because when we actually had a Billy on our Texas Longhorn YouTube channel, Texas Longhorn Football, you can feel to check that out.
Yeah,
and one of the things that
smash that subscribe button.
Hey, hit the like and subscribe. Thank you, Andy. And one of the things that came out of the conversations that Jeff Ketchum and Billy was having, and Billy and Jeff actually gave Texas A&M a lot of credit, where he said years ago, A&M made the right choice by getting into the SEC, and Texas did not. And Texas staying put and not leaving when they probably had the opportunity to, and A&M leaving and getting a head start to get into the SEC. I think, was clearly, a good move for them, to the point now Texas is like, okay, this is where we need to be. It's time to be at the big boy table, because to your point, Texas was always kind of looked down on the SEC with the whole, our academics institution, it meant so much to us, which is why they were looking a lot more out west.
And if you think about the last 10 years, Texas would have made a great Pac-12 school, or Pac-16 or whatever that would have been.
Yes, they would have. But staying here in the conference, they realized oh, whoops, probably should have. It was good to get the money, with lesser teams. It was, it was good to get the money, but getting to where your ultimate goal is and getting to where the program wants to be was a little bit more challenging. So I'm looking forward to seeing it, because I've been here since 2014. I've never seen that game in person. I'm sure you have. And Texas fans have always told you they don't want to have it. But yeah, A&M right now will be the big boy on the block. And honestly, Andy, the one thing Sarkeesian has to do, it's going to be really important, is to get some momentum before they get into the SEC, because that Arkansas game really showed,
it was an eye-opener,
how far away Texas really is for competing against the SEC. And no one viewed Arkansas as one of the big dogs in the conference. So
Arkansas was a good team last year, but they got destroyed by Georgia, and that's the gap. So that's what they're dealing with. But yeah, I think momentum's important. I am curious. You mentioned Arch Manning before. If Arch Manning were to commit to Texas, how much grace does that give Steve Sarkisian, regardless of what happens on the field this year?
Gives him tons of grace, at that point, because at that point he will say, he brought in Quinn Ewers, transfer portal now, he was a former 5-star, regarded as the top player in the country at one point. So, you still would have been able to bring in that. You bring in Arch, now all of a sudden you start thinking he becomes that Lincoln Riley, this is where quarterbacks want to go.
This is where quarterbacks go, which is a great reputation to have. And there's not really because Lincoln Riley's at USC, so he could still be that, but he can be that on the West Coast, and it doesn't necessarily affect Texas where it is. And Brent Venables, that's not the kind of vibe they're going to give off at Oklahoma from now on. So even though they probably will have good quarterbacks, so it's going to be fascinating. I can't wait to watch all this. And Anwar, thank you so much for joining us and for passing along that interview with Moro, because I think the guy, he was just dead on. I hate that we're probably not going to hear from him again this year publicly, but
Pro days next year. Maybe I'll hear from. Maybe they'll let him talk then.
Listen, Moro, if you want to spot on the Andy Staples and Friends feed, we can find a day for you. Like we'll carve one out. So
you have John
Bianco
coming to hunt you down if you do that one.
The best part, I was cutting those clips. John Bianco, the longtime sports information director of Texas, fantastic human being. At the end of one of those, and I cut it off, you can hear, any last question for Moro? And he went for like 10 more minutes. So poor John was just struggling at that point. So
probably was not a comfortable conversation John had with Sarkeesian afterwards. And so hence my bet is we see him at Pro Day in 2023.
Yeah. Before I let you go, I do have one more question. I've been watching on your Twitter feed. So your son, Max Anwar, getting wet from all over the court, just unconscious in these videos I'm seeing. How's the AAU scene for kindergartners in Austin? And are you already lining up NIL deals, or do you need the Texas State Association to fix that law or fix that rule and get that straightened out by the time he hits like 5th grade?
It's so fun. By the way, he plays for this AAU team here, Skyhook basketball.
Very nice.
So, I'm AAU guy. I figure I would support the conference, the team, and everything like that. It's fun, Andy. So he's in 3rd grade. He's a 9-year-old. He comes off the bench, and which I totally want, by the way. Just as he works his way into it and gets more comfortable because he's a little bit smaller. And he had a game. I posted it on our social media. So I was posted it on Facebook and Instagram where.
Oh, it must have been Instagram where I saw it. He was all over the place. He
was bananas. Like it just making shot after shot. And I just hadn't seen it in good form, good technique, good everything. He scored it was like a 12 off the bench in that game. But to be fair, he was a little quiet in the other games. He was more of a defensive guy in the other games. So it's, the thing about AAU, honestly, one, as a parent, is the anxiety that you have watching your kid do things and you have to let go. It's like the first time you're having to let go. And so if he gets knocked down or he gets upset, you just have to sit there. You can't be the person that wants to run out, do it. The second thing that's fascinating, Andy, is watching parents, man. Like sometimes you're just like, man, what you think?
It killed me that I could not go to my son's first football game and in middle school football last year because I was working in Georgia. But on further reflection, I'm glad I wasn't there because I would have been losing my mind. And so my wife sending me the videos of the first game got me better prepared to handle how to act at the second game.
Well, we know what helped me in the second. This is our second tournament. You know what helped me? A full Yeti cup that was sitting in my car. That I could go and relax in between games. That is actually what helped calm me down the second time.
It is truly amazing. Now we don't have any
8:30 in the morning. It's okay. It helps me get through today.
There you go. Well, you're supporting a local business. That's all that really matters. Yes. So, Anwar Richardson, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It's good talking to you as always.